Junho didn't wait for the next attack. He went looking for it. By sunrise, he was already gone. No announcement, no convoy, no protection. Just a destination. Across the city, a warehouse that didn't officially exist, but kept appearing in fragments of the signal he traced. Amara told him not to go. Not like this. They want you to move, she said. Junho didn't argue. Because she was right. But he moved anyway. Hours later, he stood outside the building, watching workers unload crates that weren't listed anywhere. Everything looked normal. Routine. Clean. Until one of the men looked up. And froze. Not in fear. In recognition. Junho didn't react. But in that moment, he understood. He hadn't found them. They had been waiting. If you're ready for a story about power, dignity, forbidden love, and the sweetest revenge you've ever witnessed, then you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because this channel brings you the most addictive romance stories you won't find anywhere else. Drop a fire in the comments if you're team revenge. And let's get into this story. Junho didn't turn back. Even after that look. Even after the realization settled in. Because stopping now would confirm something worse. That he was unsure. And uncertainty was the one thing he couldn't afford to show. The warehouse stood at the edge of the industrial district. Quiet. Isolated. Built to be ignored. From the outside, nothing was wrong. Delivery trucks moved in and out. Workers followed routine. Security, minimal. Too minimal. Junho stepped forward. No disguise. No hesitation. Because sometimes the fastest way to break a system was to walk straight through it. Inside, the air felt different. Heavier. Not from activity. From control. Every movement around him was precise. Measured. Like the entire space operated on timing. He walked past the loading area, eyes scanning everything without appearing to look. Crates stacked in rows. Marked. But not labeled. That alone told him enough. Unregistered shipments. Clean routing. No trace. He kept moving. No one stopped him. No one questioned him. But that didn't mean he wasn't being watched. It meant something else. They were allowing it. 3 minutes, a voice said quietly behind him. Junho didn't turn. You're already late. That was new. Because it wasn't fear. It wasn't aggression. It was instruction. He turned slowly. The man standing behind him wasn't armed. Not visibly. Mid-40s. Calm. Well-dressed. Not a worker. Not security. Something in between. You shouldn't be here, the man added. Junho studied him. Then why am I? He asked. A small pause. Then, because you chose to be. That answer confirmed everything. This wasn't a hidden operation. This was a controlled environment. And Junho had just stepped into it willingly. Walk with me, the man said. Not a request. Junho followed. Because now, the objective had changed. This wasn't about finding them anymore. It was about seeing how far they would let him go. They moved through a narrow corridor, away from the main floor. The noise faded behind them. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. That signal you traced, the man said, wasn't a mistake. Junho's eyes narrowed slightly. I assumed as much. Good, the man replied. Then this will be easier. They stopped at a reinforced door. Unlocked. Waiting. The man stepped aside. Go in. Junho didn't hesitate. He opened the door. And stepped inside. The room was clean. Minimal. Controlled. And at the center, a screen. Already on. Junho stepped closer. And then, the image shifted. Not data. Not files. A live feed. From inside his house. Junho's expression didn't change. But his breathing slowed. Because what he saw next wasn't random. Wasn't surveillance. It was precise. Focused. Targeted. Amara Brooks. Standing alone in the medical wing. Junho didn't move. Didn't speak. Behind him, the man's voice returned. You came here to find us. A pause. But you should have stayed where you were strong. Junho's eyes remained on the screen. Because now, the rules had changed again. This wasn't a hunt. This was leverage. And for the first time since this began, the enemy wasn't just ahead of him. They were inside his next move. Junho didn't look away from the screen. Not immediately. Because reaction was exactly what they were measuring. Behind him, the man remained still. Silent. Watching. Is she alone? Junho asked. His voice was calm. Controlled. The man gave a faint smile. Right now. A pause. Does it matter? It did. But Junho didn't show it. Instead, he stepped closer to the screen. Studying the angles. The timing. The positioning. This wasn't a random camera. It was placed deliberately. Low. Hidden. Watching Amara from a blind spot in the medical wing. Which meant they had access to the internal structure. Not just digitally. Physically. Junho turned slightly. How long? He asked. The man tilted his head. Long enough to understand everything that matters. That answer confirmed it. This wasn't new. This had been running beneath them for far longer than Han's betrayal. Junho shifted his focus back to the room itself. Minimal equipment. No clutter. No unnecessary detail. Everything here had one purpose. Control and observation. You're not the core, Junho said quietly. The man's expression didn't change. No, he replied. Then why show yourself? A pause. Then, because you're ready to see more. That wasn't arrogance. It was confidence. And that made it dangerous. Junho stepped away from the screen. Then show me. The man didn't move toward the door. Instead, he reached into his pocket and placed a small device on the table. The screen shifted instantly. Not to another camera, but to a map. The city. Layered. Segmented. With markers. Dozens of them. Junho's eyes sharpened. What is this? He asked. The man leaned slightly against the wall. Structure. Junho studied the map again. The markers weren't random. They followed patterns. Supply routes. Financial hubs. Medical distribution points. Then he saw it. Connections. Between them. Invisible lines forming a network. This wasn't smuggling. This wasn't infiltration. This was infrastructure. They don't control places, the man said. They control flow. Junho didn't respond. Because he understood. If you controlled the flow, you didn't need territory. Everything moved through you anyway. And your house, the man continued, is just one node. That was the shift. The moment the scale expanded, Junho leaned slightly forward. And Park? The man's eyes met his. A small pause. Then, he built this. Junho's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Because now, Park wasn't just an enemy. He was an architect. And what is this? Junho asked, gesturing to the map. The man's smile returned. Resilience. Junho's eyes narrowed. Explain. If one part falls, the man said calmly, the rest adapts. A beat. Like what happened with Han. That wasn't a statement. It was a demonstration. You removed him, the man continued. And the system adjusted. Junho didn't move. Didn't react. But inside, the realization locked into place. They hadn't lost anything when Han fell. They had learned. And now? Junho asked. The man stepped away from the wall. Now we move to the next phase. The screen flickered again, returning to the live feed. Amara was still there. But something had changed. Her posture. More alert. More focused. She had noticed something. Junho's gaze hardened. Because that meant time was running out. You're pushing too far, Junho said quietly. The man shook his head. No. A pause. You are. And then, everything shifted. Junho shut the system down. Not permanently. Just enough. Because now, every move mattered. And the next one would decide everything. He didn't tell the rest of the house. Didn't alert the guards. Didn't increase security. Because the moment he changed the pattern, the enemy would know. Instead, he changed something else. Himself. By morning, Junho was visible again. Meetings resumed. Calls increased. Movements became deliberate. He made sure everyone saw him. Because if someone was watching, he wanted them to believe. He hadn't seen anything. But behind that illusion, the investigation shifted outward. The signal from the hidden room had left a trace. Small. Fragmented. But enough. Junho followed it. Through secured networks. Encrypted pathways. Dead end pins. Until finally, it stopped. At a name. One he hadn't expected. One he hadn't seen in years. Chairman Park Jinwoo. Junho didn't move. Didn't speak. Because that name wasn't just familiar. It was history. Years ago, before Junho took control, Park had been part of the outer circle. A strategist. Quiet. Invisible. Then one day, he disappeared. No conflict. No betrayal. Just gone. And no one ever questioned it. Until now. Amara stood across from him as the name remained on the screen. You know him, she said. Junho nodded once. Not well enough. Because if Park had built something like this, then everything they had faced so far was only preparation. Why now? Amara asked. Junho's eyes didn't leave the screen. Because now, it's possible. That was the truth. Before, the house was too stable. Too controlled. But with Dasik weakened, with internal trust broken, the structure had opened. And Park had stepped in. Not to replace. To take. Everything. Junho leaned back slightly. Because now, the scale was clear. This wasn't internal betrayal. This was a takeover. And they had already begun. A notification appeared on the screen. Incoming. Untraceable. Junho didn't hesitate. He opened it. The message was simple. Direct. And far too confident. You're catching up faster than expected. Amara's expression hardened. He wants you to see this. Junho nodded. Of course he does. Another message followed. But you're still looking in the wrong place. And then, a file. Encrypted. Junho opened it. And for the first time since this began, his expression changed. Not shock. Something deeper. Recognition. The file wasn't data. It was footage. From inside the house. Recent. And in it, Khan Dasik. Collapsed. Again. Amara stepped forward instantly. That's not now, she said quickly. His vitals are stable. Junho's jaw tightened. Then it's a message. A warning. Or worse. A demonstration. The final line appeared on the screen. You stopped the first attempt. A pause. Then, let's see if you can stop the next one. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Unavoidable. Because now, there was no more guessing. No more hidden layers. The enemy had stepped forward. And he wasn't hiding anymore. He was inviting a war. Junho closed the screen slowly. Then looked at Amara. No more waiting, he said. Because this time, they weren't defending. They were stepping into something far bigger than the house. Far bigger than betrayal. This wasn't control anymore. This was war. The room didn't explode into chaos. That would have been easier to predict. Instead, everything tightened. The man's calm shifted first. Subtle. But visible. Because the outcome had changed. You're adapting, he said quietly. Junho didn't respond. His attention remained on the screen. On Amara. Because even though she stepped away from the door, that didn't mean the threat was gone. It meant it had to change form. And it did. The feed glitched. Not randomly. Intentionally. Cutting between angles. Medical wing. Corridor. Security blind spots. Then, it stabilized again. But not on Amara. On something else. Junho's eyes narrowed. Because now, the camera wasn't inside the house. It was outside. A vehicle. Black. Unmarked. Parked just beyond the estate perimeter. The door opened. And two men stepped out. Carrying something. No. Someone. Junho's expression didn't change. But something inside him locked into place. Because the person they were carrying was familiar. Too familiar. A member of his inner circle. One of the few people he had trusted long before all of this began. And now, he was unconscious. Bleeding. Used. They adapt fast, the man behind him said. Junho didn't turn. They planned for resistance. The implication was clear. This wasn't punishment. It was escalation. Back on the screen. The men moved with precision. No wasted motion. No hesitation. They weren't improvising. They were executing. Junho stepped forward slowly. Why show me this? He asked. A pause. Then, because now, the man said, it's not just strategy. The message was clear. They had crossed the line. This wasn't control anymore. It was personal. The screen shifted again. Back to the medical wing. Amara stood still. But her posture had changed. Tighter. More alert. She had sensed it. Even without seeing it. Junho's voice dropped slightly. Stay where you are, he said. She didn't respond. But she didn't move either. Trust. Again. The man behind him stepped closer. You're running out of options, he said. Junho turned. Slowly. And this time, there was no calm left in his eyes. Only intent. You're wrong, he said quietly. Now I know exactly what to do. And that was the moment everything shifted again. Because up until now, Junho had been reacting. Adapting. Following the lines laid out in front of him. But now, he had something they didn't expect. Clarity. And with clarity came direction. Junho moved. Fast. Not toward the door. Toward the man. The reaction was immediate. But not fast enough. Junho's strike was precise. Controlled. The man hit the ground hard. Before he could recover, Junho was already at the console. Because now, the rules were different. He wasn't playing inside their system anymore. He was breaking it. The screen flickered under Junho's control. Not clean. Not smooth. But enough. Because he didn't need full access. He just needed an opening. Behind him, the man tried to move. Junho didn't look back. Don't, he said. And something in his voice made the man stop. Junho's fingers moved across the interface. Fast. Decisive. He wasn't trying to understand the system anymore. He was targeting it. The signal routing. The relay points. The timing. Everything they had shown him was now being used against them. You built this to adapt, Junho said quietly. A pause. Then, let's see how it handles disruption. He triggered the first break. The feed split. Multiple nodes lighting up across the map. The network. Exposed. Back at the estate. Everything changed. Amara saw it immediately. Systems flickering. Signals dropping. The structure they had relied on becoming unstable. She didn't wait. She moved. Out of the medical wing. Into the corridor. Because now, the balance had shifted. The attackers were no longer in control. Back in the warehouse. The man looked at the screen. Then at Junho. You're collapsing the flow, he said. Junho didn't respond. Because this wasn't collapse. This was pressure. Each node he disrupted forced the system to react. And every reaction created exposure, locations, movements, connections. The invisible network was becoming visible. And that was all Junho needed. Send it, he said. The command triggered instantly. Back at the estate. His men received it. Coordinates. Targets. Not defensive positions. Offensive ones. And for the first time, they moved out. Not to protect, but to strike. Across the city. The operation expanded. Warehouses. Transit points. Financial hubs. One by one. They were hit. Not randomly. Precisely. Because Junho wasn't reacting anymore. He was dictating the pace. Back in the room. The man's composure broke slightly. You don't understand what you're doing, he said. Junho finally turned. I understand perfectly. A pause. You built something that depends on control. He stepped closer. So I removed it. The screen behind him lit up again. But this time, the feeds were different. Not theirs. His. Live footage of his men taking over nodes. Shutting down routes. Securing assets. The system. Turning. The man stared at it. Because this wasn't supposed to happen. Not like this. Not this fast. You forced the move, Junho said quietly. So I made it mine. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Final. Because now, the balance had shifted completely. The hunt was over. And the war had truly begun. The city didn't erupt. There were no sirens. No headlines. No visible collapse. From the outside, everything still moved. But underneath, the flow had changed. Junho stood in the warehouse, the screens behind him slowly dimming as node after node went silent. Routes cut. Signals broken. Connections severed. For the first time since this began, the system wasn't responding. It was struggling. Behind him, the man remained on the floor, breathing uneven, eyes fixed on the screens. You think this ends it? He said quietly. Junho didn't answer. Because he already knew better. By the time he returned to the estate, the damage had been contained. Faster than expected. Cleaner than expected. Amara met him at the entrance to the medical wing. No words at first. Just a look. You moved fast, she said. I had to, Junho replied. A pause. And? She asked. Junho's expression didn't change. They're exposed. Another pause. But not finished. Inside the room, Kang Dae-sik was stable again. Weaker. But alive. The inner circle member they had taken. Recovered. Barely. Everything that mattered. Still standing. On the surface. It looked like a win. And that was the problem. Later that night, Junho sat alone again. Same chair. Same window. Same city. But something felt wrong. Not in the silence. In the absence of resistance. He replayed the attack in his mind. Every move. Every response. Every adjustment. And then, he saw it. Not what they did. What they didn't do. They didn't reinforce the broken nodes. They didn't attempt recovery. They didn't counterattack. They let it fall. Junho leaned forward slightly. Because that only meant one thing. This wasn't a loss. It was a discard. A layer they were willing to sacrifice. The screen behind him flickered. Unprompted. Junho didn't turn immediately. Because he already knew. This wasn't random. When he looked, a single message sat in the center. Clean. Simple. Untraceable. Good. A pause. Then, you finally reached the part that matters. Junho's eyes narrowed. Because now, the structure made sense. Everything they had fought. Everything they had exposed. Everything they had destroyed. Was never the system. It was the test. A way to measure him. Push him. shape his response. And now, they had what they wanted. Another line appeared. Now we can begin. Silence filled the room again. But this time, it wasn't heavy. It was sharp. Focused. Junho leaned back slowly. Not shaken. Not surprised. Just certain. Because now, there were no more hidden layers. No more uncertainty. Only one truth. He wasn't chasing them anymore. They were preparing him. And whatever came next would be bigger than everything before it. Junho stood, turned toward the city. And for the first time, he didn't observe it. He measured it. Because now, the war wasn't inside the system. It was the system. And he was stepping into it fully. No hesitation. No restraint. Only intent. You've seen betrayal. You've seen the attack. You've seen the system break. But now you know the truth. That wasn't the real fight. It was preparation. Every move, every loss, every victory was building towards something much bigger. So the question isn't whether Junho can win anymore. It's whether he's ready for what's actually coming. If you think this is where it peaks, you're already behind. Because what comes next will change everything you thought you understood. Subscribe now, and don't miss the moment the real war begins.